The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, but nobody, not the bailiff, not the spectators packed into the gallery, not even the seasoned court reporter, could have predicted the explosion that was about to detonate. Karen Matthews, a 42-year-old plaintiff with an air of unshakable entitlement, stood at the podium, her designer handbag clutched like a weapon, her face already flushed with indignation. She'd come to Judge Judy's courtroom seeking $5,000 for what she claimed was a botched home repair job, but what she really wanted was validation. Validation that she was right, that the world owed her an apology, and that even a television judge would bend to her will. Across the aisle stood Marcus Chen, a 35-year-old contractor whose weathered hands and exhausted expression told the story of someone who'd dealt with Karen's impossible demands for 6 agonizing months. He had his invoices, his photographs, his signed contracts, everything that proved he'd done exactly what was agreed upon. But Karen didn't care about evidence. She cared about winning, and she'd perfected the art of bulldozing through life by simply being louder than everyone else. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. The case was supposed to be straightforward. A small claims dispute over kitchen cabinets that Karen insisted were installed incorrectly, despite Marcus's documentation showing she'd approved every step of the work. Judge Judy Scheindlin, the legal titan who'd spent over 2 decades demolishing lies and exposing fraud on national television, sat at her bench with that unmistakable expression, calm, focused, and absolutely done with nonsense before it even started. Her reading glasses perched on her nose, her eyes scanning the case file with surgical precision. She'd handled thousands of cases exactly like this one, entitled Plaintiff Meets Reality, Reality Wins. But what was about to unfold would become something different. Something legendary. As Judge Judy began asking her characteristically pointed questions, Karen's body language shifted. Her foot tapped impatiently. Her eyes rolled at every question she didn't like. When Judge Judy asked her to provide proof that the cabinets were defective, Karen waved her hand dismissively, as if evidence was beneath her. The courtroom audience, everyday people who'd lined up for hours to witness justice firsthand, began exchanging glances. The bailiff, Petrie Hawkins Bird, a man who'd seen every courtroom outburst imaginable, subtly repositioned himself. Something was building. Everyone could feel it. Marcus stood silent, his jaw clenched, his folder of evidence gripped tightly, as if holding on to the only truth that mattered in a room where Karen was rewriting reality with every breath. Then Judge Judy delivered the observation that would light the fuse. Her voice cut through the courtroom with that signature blend of Brooklyn bluntness and judicial authority. Ma'am, I've looked at these photographs. I've read the contract. The work was completed exactly as specified. You signed off on every phase. So explain to me, and I mean with facts, not feelings, why you believe you're owed a single penny. The words hung in the air like a verdict already rendered. Karen's face transformed. The flush deepened to crimson. Her knuckles went white as she gripped the podium. For 3 seconds, 3 impossibly long seconds, the courtroom held its collective breath, and then Karen detonated. Her voice didn't just rise. It erupted, shattering the decorum of the courtroom like glass hitting concrete. You don't understand anything, she screamed, her finger jabbing toward Judge Judy with shocking disrespect. You're sitting up there judging me when you haven't even listened to what I've been through. This is my case, my money, and you are being completely unfair. The words ricocheted off the walls. Spectators gasped audibly. One woman in the front row actually put her hand over her mouth in disbelief. The court reporter's fingers froze over the keys. Marcus's eyes went wide, not with satisfaction but with the uncomfortable realization that Karen had just done exactly what he'd warned his lawyer she might do. She'd lost control. Completely. And she wasn't stopping. Karen's tirade continued, her voice cracking with rage and indignation. I came here for justice, not to be talked down to like I'm some kind of idiot. You think you can just sit there and tell me I'm wrong? I have rights. I am the customer and he— She whipped around to point at Marcus, her hand shaking. He ruined my kitchen and now you're taking his side like I don't even matter. The courtroom was frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody dared even breathe too loudly. Cell phones, though technically prohibited, were subtly angled upward in purses and jacket pockets, capturing every second of what everyone instinctively knew would become a viral moment. The bailiff took one step forward, his hand hovering near his belt, waiting for Judge Judy's signal. But Judge Judy didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She sat perfectly still at her bench, her hands folded in front of her, her expression completely unreadable. The silence that followed Karen's outburst was more deafening than the screaming had been. It stretched out, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, every tick of the courtroom clock thunderous in the stillness. Karen stood there, chest heaving, face flushed, apparently convinced that her explosion had made some kind of point. That volume equaled validity. The audience waited, transfixed. Marcus waited, barely breathing. The bailiff waited, ready to act. And then, with the deliberate calm of someone who'd been handling tantrums since before Karen was born, Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, removed her glasses with one hand, and looked directly into Karen's eyes. What she said next didn't just silence the courtroom. It stopped time. Her voice was low, measured, and carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind of authority that doesn't need volume because it's built on decades of competence, millions of cases, and an unshakable moral clarity. The words that came out of Judge Judy's mouth weren't just a response to Karen's disrespect. They were a masterclass in how to dismantle entitlement with nothing but truth, composure, and the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly who they are and what they stand for. In 90 seconds, Judge Judy would do what seemed impossible. She would show the entire world that real power doesn't scream, doesn't threaten, and doesn't need theatrics. Real power simply speaks the truth and lets the chips fall where they may. And Karen, who'd spent her entire life yelling her way to victory, was about to learn that she'd finally met her match. Before we dive into the precise words that left everyone speechless, hit that like button if you're hooked on real courtroom drama, and subscribe to stay in the loop on moments the highlight reels might miss. This wasn't just about one case, it was about respect, authority, and what happens when entitlement meets experience. Judge Judy's response didn't just win the case. It became a cultural moment that millions would replay, dissect, and learn from. And it all started with the calm that followed the storm. The morning had started like any other in Judge Judy's courtroom. A fresh docket of small claims cases, each one a snapshot of everyday disputes that had spiraled out of control. Karen Matthews versus Marcus Chen seemed on paper unremarkable. $5,000. Kitchen cabinets. A contractor and a client who couldn't see eye to eye, but from the moment Karen walked through those courtroom doors, everyone who worked there knew this case would be different. She carried herself with that unmistakable energy, the kind that announces without words that compromise is for other people. Her heels clicked authoritatively on the floor. Her expression was set in permanent dissatisfaction, as if the world itself had personally failed her. When she sat down before the proceedings began, she didn't just sit. She positioned herself, angling her body toward the camera, checking her appearance in her phone's reflective screen, preparing for what she clearly believed would be her moment of vindication on national television. Marcus Chen, by contrast, looked like a man who'd already been through a war. His work boots were scuffed, his button-down shirt pressed but showing the wear of someone who worked with his hands for a living. The folder he carried was thick with documents, contracts, invoices, email printouts, photographs time-stamped and organized. He'd done this before, not in courtrooms, but in his business. Documentation was protection. He'd learned that the hard way. When his lawyer had prepped him for this case, Marcus had said simply, "Just let her talk. She'll show you who she really is." Now, standing across from Karen, he looked exhausted but resolved, like someone who knew the truth would eventually win but dreaded the process of getting there. The case itself was simple. 6 months earlier, Karen had hired Marcus's company to install custom kitchen cabinets in her suburban home. The contract was clear. Specific measurements, specific materials, specific timeline. Marcus had met every requirement. He had Karen's signature on approval forms at every phase, after measurements, after material selection, after installation. But 2 weeks after the job was completed, Karen called demanding a full refund and an additional $5,000 for emotional distress. Her complaint? The cabinets were not what she envisioned, despite being exactly what she'd approved in writing. Marcus had offered to make minor adjustments at no charge. Karen had refused and immediately threatened legal action. Now they were here, in the one courtroom where signatures, dates, and documentation mattered more than volume or victimhood. Judge Judy began the proceedings with her standard opening, asking each party to state their case. Karen launched into a passionate monologue about her dream kitchen turned nightmare, about how Marcus had bullied her into signing things she didn't understand, about how she'd trusted him and he'd betrayed that trust. She spoke for 3 uninterrupted minutes, her voice rising and falling dramatically, her hands gesturing wildly. The audience watched, some with sympathy, others with skepticism. Then Judge Judy turned to Marcus. "Your response?" He opened his folder, pulled out a single document, and said quietly, "She approved everything. Here's her signature, 5 times. Judge Judy took the document, studied it for 10 seconds, and looked back up at Karen. That's when the room's temperature changed. That's when Karen realized this wasn't customer service. This was a courtroom, And Judge Judy had already seen through every word. The breaking point came when Judge Judy set down the contract and looked directly at Karen with that expression, the one millions of viewers had learned to recognize as the moment before truth demolishes fiction. Her voice was calm, almost conversational, but every word landed like a gavel. Ma'am, I'm looking at 5 separate documents here. 5 separate occasions where you signed your name, confirming that the work met your specifications. Are you telling me you signed documents you didn't read? Or are you telling me you read them, approved the work, and now you've changed your mind? The question wasn't rhetorical. It was a trap constructed from Karen's own words, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Karen's face shifted from confident to cornered in an instant. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, and then something inside her snapped. "You don't get it," she shouted, her voice cracking with indignation. "You're sitting up there like you know everything, but you weren't there. You didn't see how he rushed me through those signatures. You didn't hear how he pressured me?" Her hand slammed down on the podium, the sound echoing through the stunned courtroom. Judge Judy's expression didn't change, didn't even flicker, but Karen interpreted the silence as permission to continue. She was wrong. "I am a paying customer." Karen's voice climbed higher, her finger now jabbing toward the bench. "And I have rights. I have the right to be heard, and you are not listening to me. You've already decided. You've already taken his side because everyone just wants to make me the bad guy." Spittle flew from her lips. Her face was scarlet. The carefully constructed persona of the wronged homeowner had completely disintegrated, replaced by raw, unfiltered entitlement. The courtroom was paralyzed. Spectators sat frozen, eyes wide, some mouths literally hanging open. One elderly man in the third row slowly shook his head in disbelief. A young woman in business attire had her hand pressed against her chest as if witnessing a car accident. Marcus stood completely still at his podium, his expression a mixture of vindication and secondhand embarrassment. This was exactly what he'd endured for 6 months, now on full display for the world to see. The bailiff, Petrie Hawkins Bird, who'd maintained order in this courtroom for over 2 decades, took a measured step forward, his eyes locked on Judge Judy, waiting for the signal. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the keys, frozen mid-sentence. Even the camera operators, trained professionals who'd filmed thousands of cases, seemed to lean in slightly, sensing that this moment would be replayed for years. But Karen wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened, and years of getting her way through sheer force of will came pouring out. "How dare you judge me?" she screamed, her voice now shrill and trembling. "I came here for justice, not to be humiliated on television. This is a joke. You're a joke! This whole thing is rigged." She pointed at Marcus again, her hand shaking violently. "He's a con artist, and you're helping him rip me off." The accusation hung in the air like toxic smoke. The courtroom held its collective breath, waiting for the explosion they knew had to come. But it didn't come from who they expected. Judge Judy sat perfectly still, her hands still folded, her face a mask of complete composure. She let the silence stretch. 5 seconds, 7, 10, each one heavier than the last. Karen stood there, chest heaving, face flushed, apparently believing her tantrum had accomplished something. She had no idea that she'd just handed Judge Judy everything she needed. The veteran judge leaned forward slowly, her eyes never leaving Karen's face, and when she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet the courtroom had to strain to hear it. And that's exactly what made it devastating. Judge Judy removed her glasses with deliberate slowness, setting them down on the bench with a soft click that somehow carried more weight than Karen's entire screaming fit. She folded her hands precisely, leaned back in her chair, and fixed Karen with a gaze that had reduced thousands of liars to stammering wrecks over 25 years on television. When she spoke, her voice was almost conversational. No anger, no theatrics, just the calm authority of someone who'd forgotten more about human behavior than Karen would ever know. "Ma'am," she began, the word itself somehow both respectful and devastating. "In the 25 years I've been doing this show, I have seen every variation of your performance, every single one." The pause that followed was surgical. "And I'm going to tell you something that apparently nobody in your life has had the courage to say. Your tantrum doesn't make you right, it makes you wrong and rude." The courtroom was so silent you could hear the air conditioning hum. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Judge Judy wasn't finished. "You came into my courtroom. Not a customer service desk, not a complaint department. My courtroom, with a case built on signatures you willingly made, approvals you consciously gave, and now you're angry because I'm holding you accountable for your own actions." Her voice remained level, but each word landed like a hammer. "You signed 5 separate documents, 5, that's not being rushed. That's not being pressured, that's called doing business. And now that you've decided you don't like what you agreed to, you're trying to bully your way into a refund by throwing a fit." Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "That might work at the mall, ma'am. It doesn't work here. Karen tried to interrupt, her voice weak and defensive. But Judge Judy raised one finger and Karen's voice died instantly. That single gesture carried more authority than all of Karen's screaming combined. I'm not done, Judge Judy said quietly. You stood at that podium and called me a joke. You called this courtroom rigged. You called a hardworking contractor who has documentation for every claim he made a con artist. And why? Because I had the audacity to ask you to provide evidence for your case? She picked up the contract, holding it up for the cameras. This is evidence, ma'am. Your signature, your approval, your responsibility. And you know what's not evidence? Your feelings, your outrage, your tantrum. She set the document down with finality. The facts don't care how loudly you yell. Then Judge Judy delivered the observation that would be quoted in comment sections for years. You know what your behavior today proved? It proved exactly what Mr. Chen said about you. That you're impossible to please, that you change your mind after agreeing to things, and that when you don't get your way, you attack. You just did it to him for 6 months, and you tried to do it to me for 6 minutes. The difference is he had to take it because he needed to get paid. The courtroom was transfixed. Several spectators were nodding now, their faces showing the satisfaction of watching accountability finally catch up with entitlement. Marcus's shoulders had relaxed for the first time since entering the courtroom, his expression one of quiet relief. Judge Judy picked up her pen, made a brief note, and looked up one final time. Judgment for the defendant. Case dismissed. Your behavior today just proved you owe him an apology, not the other way around. The gavel came down with a crack that felt like punctuation on a sentence Karen would never forget. We're done here. The clip hit social media like a lightning strike. Within 3 hours of the episode airing, the video titled, Angry Karen Yells at Judge Judy, Her Calm Reply Silences Entire Courtroom, was racking up 50,000 views per hour on YouTube. By the next morning, it had crossed 2 million. TikTok exploded with reaction videos, creators filming themselves watching the moment, their expressions shifting from shock to disbelief to pure satisfaction as Judge Judy delivered her devastating response. Instagram Reels cut the exchange down to 15-second snippets, each one more viral than the last. The hashtag Judge Judy's Karen trended worldwide within 24 hours, accumulating over 40 million impressions. Twitter was ablaze with hot takes, memes, and endless commentary. One tweet captured the collective sentiment perfectly. Karen really thought she could intimidate Judge Judy. That's like trying to arm wrestle a brick wall and being surprised when you lose. The comment sections became digital courtrooms of their own, with thousands weighing in on every aspect of the confrontation. The way Judge Judy just sat there silent while Karen screamed, "That's assassin-level composure," one comment with 89,000 likes read. Another added, "Karen's face when she realized yelling doesn't work in an actual courtroom is priceless." Younger viewers loved the main character gets humbled energy, with Gen Z dubbing it the ultimate sit-down. Millennials appreciated the justice of watching entitled behavior meet consequences. Even boomers, typically divided on generational discourse, unified around one truth: you don't disrespect Judge Judy. The political spectrum dissolved. Progressives and conservatives alike celebrated the moment as proof that accountability transcends ideology. One viral TikTok set the exchange to dramatic music, racking up 8 million views and spawning hundreds of copycats. Entertainment media picked up the story immediately. BuzzFeed ran Judge Judy just delivered the most savage takedown of 2024. TMZ posted the clip with the headline, Karen Gets Judied. Legal podcasts dedicated entire episodes to analyzing the exchange, with former judges praising Judge Judy's restraint and effectiveness. Body language experts dissected every frame. Karen's aggressive pointing, her flushed face, her defensive posture, contrasted against Judge Judy's controlled stillness, strategic silence, and surgical word choice. Psychology Today ran an article titled, Why Staying Calm Beats Matching Aggression, the Judge Judy Method. The clip appeared on morning talk shows, with hosts playing it for studio audiences who erupted in applause at Judge Judy's response. Even late-night comedians got in on it, with one joking, "Somewhere, every manager Karen has ever demanded to speak to is watching this and weeping with joy." The video became the #1 clip in Judge Judy's digital archive, surpassing decades of legendary moments. Karen had wanted to be seen and heard. She got her wish, just not the way she'd imagined. This moment transcended one courtroom case and became a cultural referendum on authority, respect, and accountability in modern America. Judge Judy's response proved a fundamental truth that society desperately needed to hear. Real authority doesn't require volume. It requires competence, consistency, and the courage to hold people accountable regardless of how loudly they complain. For decades, customer service culture had conditioned people like Karen to believe that escalation equals victory. That if you yell loud enough, demand the manager insistently enough, threaten bad reviews aggressively enough, someone will eventually cave just to make you go away. Judge Judy represented the immovable object that entitled behavior had never encountered. A place where your feelings don't override facts, where signatures matter more than tantrums, and where respect isn't given on demand but earned through conduct. The lesson resonated across generations and professions. Teachers shared it as an example of maintaining authority without losing composure. Managers used it in training sessions about handling difficult clients. Parents showed it to teenagers learning about consequences. The takeaway was universal. When someone loses control, the person who stays calm controls the outcome. Judge Judy didn't just win a case, she demonstrated that dignity and truth are more powerful than any amount of manufactured outrage. Judge Judy's calm, measured response to Karen's courtroom meltdown didn't just win the case. It taught millions what real authority looks like. Before you go, hit that like button if this story inspired you, and subscribe to catch more moments where composure triumphs over chaos. This wasn't just about one entitled plaintiff. It was about respect, accountability, and the power of staying calm when others lose control. Judge Judy showed us that you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You just need to be right. Be prepared, and never let someone else's tantrum shake your resolve. Years from now, this clip will still circulate, a timeless example of what happens when entitlement meets experience. Judge Judy's legacy isn't just 25 years of television or thousands of cases decided. It's moments like this where she demonstrated that true power doesn't scream, doesn't negotiate with nonsense, and doesn't bend to bullying. Karen's identity may fade from memory, but her cautionary tale will endure. A permanent reminder that in the age of smartphones and viral videos, your worst moment can become everyone's teaching moment. The courtroom that day wasn't just about kitchen cabinets or $5,000. It was about a principle that every person watching understood instinctively. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And accountability isn't optional just because it's uncomfortable. Judge Judy remained exactly what she's always been, unshakable, fair, and in complete control. The gavel fell. The ruling stood. And the world learned once again, you can yell at Judge Judy, but you'll never win. Case closed.